With Season of the Wish ending after being around for half a year and the final shape starting up on June 4th, now would be a good time to look back at the season and also what I thought about how it fares compared to the other seasons. Now, this will not include Into the Light, as that will be a separate video because, in my opinion, it is its own individual thing, and also I don't want to have this video go twice as long. And again, I'll be making that video later and you'll be seeing that come up on the channel in due time. Now, with that being said, we're going to start off with the storyline of the season itself, which essentially just leads right off from where Season of the Witch ended, because again, we found out the 15th wish from Season of the Witch, and now we actually go and meet up with Marasov at the Wall of Wishes and put in that 15th wish, which ultimately allows Marasov to meet the quote-unquote dead version of Riven, essentially just a embodiment of Riven back so that the final wish can actually be processed. Now, like with every single situation that it comes to having another entity join us and help us out, there's a deal that has to be made, and in this case, it is to save Riven's eggs, which apparently became scattered along the ley lines that honestly haven't really been relevant for, what, I think a year or so? Since, Season of the Lost, I think? So, it's been a little bit since those ley lines actually came into play. Now, obviously, we go through and each week we will help get some additional eggs, and then, essentially, right before the final egg is found, we also kind of figure out, through an exotic mission, about some other details connected to the reason why these eggs were scattered out. It actually has to do with another wish dragon called Tyrannus, who was Riven's partner. Now, Tyrannus did want to make sure that the eggs were safe during the Great Hunt. So what he did is that he wished that the eggs would be scattered along away from any harm or any destruction, and sacrificed himself to do so. Riven ultimately finds out about this through the Star-Crossed mission and kind of goes through this whole situation of like, this is kind of something that shouldn't be happening, but again, situations can always come out of left field when it comes to it. Now, ultimately, we do find all the eggs, and with that, Riven actually does grant us a wish, which is to send one of us into the Traveler, or to the quote-unquote Pale Heart. Now, with the situation and the dynamics in play, ultimately Osiris and Marasov do decide that Crow would be the best option because Marasov has the deep connection with Crow, who previously was Aldred Sov, and so that connection they would be able to utilize to create a bridge from where Crow is inside the Traveler to where we are, so we can make sure that we get through without any issues. And in the final mission, we find out that we had to go back to the garden to figure out what was causing some anomalies that were preventing it from fully connecting, and we find out that what was happening was a simulated version of the Black Heart that we destroyed back in Destiny 1 was essentially trying to interfere and prevent us from making that connection with Crow. Now, we do take care of that fairly straightforward in essentially the same style as it was originally, and we ultimately make that connection with Crow and find out that he has landed within the Pale Heart, which ultimately ends the main storyline as we got the final job done, we got the goal that we needed to, and the connection was made between Crow and Mara. Now, the story itself, my personal thoughts on it was pretty cool. I did like the whole idea of how, we're working with not only Riven, but Mara, and then also utilizing Osiris's teachings, like what he learned through working with the Veil and trying to figure out and piece together some sort of situation that will allow us to be able to connect and get us to the witness that went inside the Traveler back in the beginning of Lightfall. Now, obviously, the dynamics and the interactions that we get are actually pretty nice. I think also the fact that we're getting some small backstory lore on Mara as well as the others was kind of cool as well, just because, one, we're getting more fleshed out for the characters, we have more understanding of what's gone on in the past, and it's not just like, hey, here's one dynamic, and we just left it at that. And so ultimately, I think this is really cool. However, outside of that, it's again the same generic story structure for Defiance, Witch, and Deep. It's like a 7-week long thing that you can all do at once, and it will only take like maybe 3 to 4 hours. So you're not really missing much. You can blitz through that, no problem now. And with the final mission out, you can get everything done. You can get all the aspects of it done, and you'll be able to be caught up with how everything precedes the final shape. Now, personally, I think this is online with the Season of the Witch, as it has had an interesting story and somewhat kind of works with it, although again, there is a couple of things that I have like no understanding about, and honestly, it's just really, really dumb. But that's just what happens in a lot of these, where there's just certain situations that really doesn't make any sense and doesn't get highlighted on afterwards until maybe an eon later in like a different season altogether. So the activities that are introduced in this season is Riven's Lair and also the Coil. Now, technically also Blindwell does kind of get a little bit of a mention because there has been some changes, but primarily it's just been really a loot refresh, meaning that the loot pool is updated to be more in line with the current weapons. And also there's a couple of changes with a couple of the bosses when it comes to the actual fights themselves. But again, it's still the same thing, still generic, go fight stuff and have fun at the boring place. But at least they are updating it so you can actually get some stuff that you would want. Now, let's actually focus on the main activities. So, Riven's Lair and the Coil is kind of the main aspect of how you get the loot from the actual season itself. Now, Riven's Lair is like Savathûn's Spire, which is comprised of 2 encounters, but unlike Savathûn's Spire, where it's just like a simple walk from A to B with maybe like a puzzle or something of the sort, you actually have a mini encounter before that encounter actually starts. Like the actual thing is that it's just a journey from one place to another. And that's actually kind of nice because it allows you to go through and still be engaged without just waltzing across to the other side. And the cool part is that it's not always going to be the same thing. It can be one of 3 different types. It could be dealing with Vex, dealing with Scorn, or dealing with the Taken, which is actually kind of nice. It kind of makes it a little bit more of a actual flavoring change type deal, and it's not just like a straightforward, okay, I'm expecting X, Y, and Z to go through with this, which is nice, and I think that's actually really cool, and it could always be something different compared to what you were anticipating. Now, the Coil itself, though, is completely different in terms of taking what Riven's Lair is and multiplying it by 4 and increasing the amount of stuff that you get from it. So, for example, you know how we go through Riven's Lair just once? The Coil is that you do it 4 different times. Each time you get a chest with some loot. If you have the keys for that season, you could also open it up, and you'll get some crystals that will give you some upgrades that will help you with the next level. Now, it does increase the difficulty slightly by a level of 5, and if you go through each single iteration, the more chests you get, the more points you get. By the end of it, you will get up to 5 chests that you can open, including one that's specifically for armor or for guns, depending on what you would want. And also, you can get Ascendant shards from there. You can also get the other upgrade modules and everything like that. It's actually really nice, as it's a way that you can gain all this item, all these things that other situations won't be able to get you. But you won't have to worry about champions, which is nice. It feels like you get a lot more loot for it for the time you put in, because it does take around 45 to an hour, depending on if you're doing it with just randoms or if you're doing it with a prep fire team. But again, the return on investment for that compared to just doing like the Riven's Lair is much better, because on top of just the regular chests that you get at the end of each run, if you get enough points by getting those crystals from those pots that you see spread around, you will also be able to get secret chests that will give you more points and give you some other loot that you would be able to grind for. It's really nice when you have like just a ton of different options for loot, especially when it's just, hey, I'm gonna spend an hour in here and I'm gonna get like at least 10 pieces of weapons or, a piece of armor if I want to. And then you also get other stuff that you were not expecting that you gain that you would have to do, like a master run or something of that sort. And it's so nice, and I really love it. I think this is possibly one of the better options when it comes to grinding out weapons and grinding out just different types of loot, better pieces for armor, and all those aspects in between. It's just so much better, and I will just gush about it the entire time. But let's face it, I do need to kind of move on to the next part, which is actually the dungeon itself. Now, the final aspect that I would want to highlight is Warlord's Ruin. Now, obviously, this is just like a dungeon that came out with Season of the Deep. However, it does have a different system in place. Now, obviously, comparing it to Ghost of the Deep is not the best option, so we'll just kind of go and look at the other ones. Now, it does have, just like the others, 3 different encounters, but normally there is a mechanics encounter involved within there, either with like a mini boss or just a series of puzzles that you would have to do. However, in this case, each encounter is a boss fight, which I think is really cool, because on top of the fact that the mechanics that you have to learn are being used against a boss, each of the mechanics that are being applied is being applied in a different manner. So you may be utilizing it one way in the first one, and then another way in the second one, and then a completely different way in the third one, which is really cool because it allows you to actually kind of evolve the way that you would think, rather than just, okay, this is what we have to do for this is what we have to do for that, great, awesome, whatever. And not only that, but also the damage phases and the way they work also changes with the bosses. So it's never the same type of situation, and it gets more complex and more interesting the further you go along. So I think when it comes to that, the way that they kind of leveled it up each single time is actually really cool when it comes to anything that's involving the bosses themselves. Especially since, in this case, it's just a boss after boss after boss after boss, which is really, really awesome. And I always like when it comes to those fights, just because you got something to do, you have someone to fight, it's not just all basic mechanics and ad clearing. Now, the one thing that I definitely would want to highlight out of all the bosses is the final one. If you haven't gone through it, I highly recommend you do, or at least try and get access to it, because the last fight itself is really cool, because the arena itself is split up into 4 different areas, so to speak, one segment after another, and then you have, once you did all the first 3 segments with the mechanics, you then have your little damage phase area where you would be able to do as much damage as you can, as long as you're able to keep the damage phase open, which really does change the dynamics, because just like how in other ones where it's like try and do as much damage as you can in that first damage phase, the real damage phase doesn't happen until after you get up to the top area, which is where the actual damage phase is. However, you still are able to do damage from the first, second, and third points before that. And beyond that, if you actually look at the setting for it, I love it. I think it's really cool that we're going through a rundown castle, and the story behind it as well, that you're able to go and discover through one of the quests that you get right after you finish it the first time, allows us to be able to understand more of it. And I appreciate that a lot, because it's more interesting to get that information, that storyline, along with this dungeon, because when it comes to just, providing random dialogue in the middle of going through all the aspects, that's cool. But I think having an exact storyline that helps base out the lore of the area makes it even much better and more of something to appreciate, rather than just, oh, hey, here's a side story that you can get. So I think, honestly, this is 100% worth going through. The weapons are great too, and I think this is definitely something that you should check out. Now, after going over everything within this season, I would say it's pretty good. It was a decent storyline, there was fun activities that weren't boring and gives you just a ton of loot, like I said before, especially with the amount of time that you put into it, and a really cool dungeon that really diverts away from the expected structure of them. It really kind of adds a nice little ending to it because it feels good that we're kind of ending off on this somewhat of a high compared to where we started with Season of Defiance. Now, overall, I would give this around an 8 or an 8.5, which is, closer to the higher end. I would say maybe online or slightly above Season of the Witch in total. Now, obviously, the main detractions of this is that, of course, drip feed content, meaning that the ton of stories that we would have had, you can finish up in like 3 or 4 hours, not even. And on top of that, we had this for about 6 months, and only up until recently we got something new that, again, like I said, is not going to be within this video. It's actually going to be in the next video that I'm going to be going over. So that is something to kind of give you an idea of having a good season, but if it's going on for so long, which in this case was 6 months, it really doesn't help when that's the only thing you can do and you get into this kind of content drought situation. But, like I did say, Bungie did create a content drop recently of Into the Light, which will be in the next one. But until then, thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed. If you do want to see the Let's Play of the season, you can always check in the description. That's going to be going to there. It's on the main channel, and it should be finished up at this point if you're watching this when it comes out. But until then, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.